Train to the End of the World, or Shumatsu Train Dokueku, gets a 5 out of 10. I've seen countless people talking about how this is a show that you should watch without knowing anything about it, or how going in with zero expectations is a good thing here. I absolutely disagree with that entire sentiment. That's great if it's the kind of show you'll like. But if the preseason summaries even so much as hinted at what this show would be, there is no way in hell I would have watched it, and I would have been happier for it. So here I am to give a brief rundown. As usual, mostly trying to stay spoiler-free, although some spoilers will inevitably slip in somewhere. Train to the End of the World follows 4 girls and their dog as they travel across a broken and warped Japan to find a friend who left their hometown. If it were just that simple, though, I wouldn't have opened this the way I did. It is one of the most surreal and over-the-top shows I've seen, with some of the loudest and most obnoxious characters and humour around. And some people will love that. The people who will enjoy this show will talk about it for years to come, because it's incredibly memorable and wholly unique. The problem for me is that unique tends to mean nobody's done this for a reason. And coming from the director behind the worst show I have ever watched, it wasn't really destined to be a favourite of mine. For more on the worst show I've watched, there is a link in the comments to a recent co-host post I made about Bludgeoning Angel Dokuro-chan. Rain will get straight into the world, because the first episode is a trip. The show opens with a girl being pulled into a grand spectacle and celebration as the lucky visitor who gets to hit the button to start 7G, which immediately breaks physics apart and warps the world into something unrecognizable. If that sounds like the start of some conspiracist's fever dream, you're probably on the same lines I was here, and this nearly became the first show I fully dropped since I got back into anime 3 years ago. That sets up the majority of the show. The 4 girls, with the help of one of the residents of their hometown, take off across the newly shaped world to try and find their friend who ran away to Ikebukuro before things broke down. The characters themselves are mostly massive stereotypes. Nadeko is the composed and calm one, at times acting like a parent to Reimi and Akira, who are the loud Gyaru and the quiet bookworm, respectively. The protagonist, Shizuru, is an act first, think later kind of hero, although she's a little muted when she's compared to Reimi. Normally one to complain about stereotypical characters, and individually I think the characters here are pretty awful. But there are some really good moments of interaction between Reimi and Akira in particular. It's not much, and it's definitely not enough for me to like Reimi as a whole, but the character dynamics are handled well at the very least. Meanwhile, the side cast is thankfully small, because the few that do show up semi-regularly, Zenjiro and Pontaro, are incredibly irritating. One has their ego played up to the extreme, being incredibly obnoxious on one note every time they appear, while the other has been experimented on to the point that they spend most of their time just making train noises. Which brings us nicely to the comedy in the show, and one of the main reasons I just can't recommend it. The vast majority of the comedy here is incredibly bland and repetitive. There are only so many times a conversation can get cut off by a person making train noises before it stops being funny, assuming you're someone who would find that funny to begin with. And that's kind of frustrating, because there are some genuinely witty and funny moments in this show. Some of Akira's literary references are hilarious, and the Maho Shoujo episode stands out as a funny and innovative episode that shows what it could have been. Instead, it gets dragged down by constantly pulling itself back to square one whenever it looks like things might improve. It isn't just the comedy that does this either. There are moments of the show that feel really comfy. And as somebody who loves the Yashike shows, those moments are really refreshing. But they're inevitably broken apart by characters screaming out of nowhere, or some surreal nonsense that exists solely to break that atmosphere. Most of the issues with Train to the End of the World come from their clash of styles. It sometimes wants to be a calm and comfy show, but at other times it's loud and demanding. Sometimes it wants to be a subtle, witty comedy, and at other times it wants to be entirely slapstick and catchphrases. Sometimes it wants to be a relaxing journey across a bizarre new world, while at other times it wants that new world to be haunting and horrific. In theory, that means there's probably something here for everyone. And if you can handle those shifts, then this is probably a show you'll love. But it also means there's likely something here that you'll hate. And it's a lot harder to move past those moments when they're constantly breaking up the good parts. If you liked this video and want to read more of my reviews ahead of the video releases, or if you'd like to support me in making these, check out the links in the description, and I hope to see you here again for the next one.